So welcome. We will get started. My name is Mark Melanson, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Community Living Network. We are a statewide membership organization representing providers of supported living, independent living, employment, respite, and personal assistance services. Today's vaccine forum is all about COVID-19 vaccine and provide an opportunity for our attendees to ask an expert questions and get real answers. After my first meeting with our featured speaker, Dr. Hlatshwayo Davis, there was no doubt that she will offer her advice with a quick sense of humor that you won't soon forget. Today, there are no wrong questions. So I want to thank folks that were able to send their questions in ahead of time. And we want folks to feel free to ask anything they want to know about the vaccines today. Couple of logistics. This is a webinar and it is being recorded, but to ask questions, you can use the raised hand feature and we can unmute, and if you would like to turn on your video, you can do that. You can also use the QA or the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll be monitoring that. And when we get to the QA portion of today's program, we will look back and we will read those questions out loud for you. We also have Asl Interpreters here with us today, so our Zoom room moderator, Jessica, will make sure that they are a featured spotlighted video, but if you have any trouble, be sure to look for them and pin their video. But hopefully there should be no problem in your ability to see the Asl Interpreters as we go throughout our presentation today. Really want to acknowledge and thank our co-sponsors for today. We really assembled many people from a statewide perspective on how we can just have this real open discussion about vaccines. So really want to appreciate the Department of Developmental Services, the Association of Regional Center Agencies, California Disability Service Association, and the ARC-UCP collaboration. They've really helped us in the planning phases of this, as well as to get the word out to get as many folks to join us today as possible, to really have that real talk about vaccines. One of our co-sponsors, Amy Wesling, the Executive Director of the Association of Regional Center Agencies, is here with us today, and just want to give her an opportunity to provide some opening remarks for us. Amy, are you there?
I am. Thanks so much, Mark.
Welcome, Amy. Thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
And really appreciate the opportunity. And I am very heartened to see over 200 people participating in this webinar to talk in frank terms about vaccinations. But before we launch into that, I did just want to say on behalf of the regional centers and the hundreds of thousands of people they support, just really want to express our gratitude for all of the heroic efforts that direct support professionals have put forward over the last very difficult 15 months. I think that, you know, one of the things on the front end of the pandemic that we all worried about was, what if people stopped showing up to work and stopped supporting those people that we all care about and are here to help lead better lives. And remarkably, you all showed up, and you kept showing up, and you kept doing the hard work even when times were very uncertain. And so really appreciate you being here today, but even more so, really appreciate all of the efforts that you've put forward over the last 15 months. And just know that it didn't go unnoticed, and we can't express our gratitude enough. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, Mark.
Oh, thanks so much, Amy. It's always a pleasure to have you at our events. So appreciate your time today. So thank you, as well as getting the word out for today's event. So appreciate it. Thank you, Amy. So with that, we are honored to have with us today our featured speaker, Dr. Hlatshwayo Davis. Dr. Hlatshwayo Davis is a nationally and internationally respected and in-demand contributor on COVID-19 with a passionate focus on marginalized populations. She's been a featured speaker on CNN, MSNBC, BBC, and Al Jazeera due to her expertise in her field. She has her medical degree with a specialty in internal medicine and has completed her infectious disease fellowship as well as a 1-year HIV fellowship and a 2-year sexually transmitted infections fellowship. She is currently an infectious disease physician at the John Cochrane VA Medical Center, where she is the lead HIV clinician, the graduate medical education coordinator, and the outpatient parental antibiotic therapy supervisor. Her passion for community engagement, diversity, and inclusion led her to becoming the co-chair for the Fast Track Cities Initiative in St. Louis, where she is dedicated to ending the HIV epidemic by 2030. She has been appointed by the City of St. Louis Board of Health, where she helps lead the area in upholding the highest possible medical and public health standards. Dr. Davis's research interests include the impact of COVID-19 infections in marginalized populations. As the clinical co-leader for a regional COVID-19 population prevalence grant, she brings her expertise in infectious disease and roots in the community to write protocols for management of COVID-19 positive individuals, designed a program to provide wraparound services to those in need, and managed a workforce around this clinical response effort. Dr. Davis, thanks so much for being here with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a long year for all of us. And yet we still need to ask the questions that need to be asked in regards to COVID and the vaccine. And so, you know, as someone who is a member of a marginalized population, it's important to me that we have those conversations, especially for those of us who occupy groups and demographics that are often left behind, that are often not seen, and that are often not included upfront in community needs and education. So, you know, I'm very informal. As you're listening, please take the opportunity to ask me questions and to think of questions, place them in the chat, or when I'm done with the formal part of the presentation, we can talk about them. So I'm not gonna, yap on about who I am, because I think Mark made me sound way better than I can myself. So let's move on to what our objectives for today are. So the first thing is I want to be able to describe the impact of COVID-19 on marginalized populations. I want to provide a history of why that happens. Why do people have mistrust in medicine, and what can we do to combat that? And then discuss potential paths forward. So like I said, it's been a long year. The slides before you show the 7-day cumulative incidence rate of COVID-19 cases. So very simply, how we've been doing with COVID cases over the year, and looking at the total population. So if you look at this at the left side going up, it shows you the total cases in millions, and the dates on the bottom. And the second graph does the same for deaths. And you can see that, since the beginning, we had cases steadily go up, and we've had multiple peaks and troughs throughout the time here, with main peaks being, we saw some surges in May and June, and then again at the end of last year. Same with death rates. And like I said, it's been a long road for us all. It's impacted us as individuals, it's impacted our families, and certainly our communities. And some of the first data that came out around marginalized populations was in regards to ethnicity. So the table at the bottom, I'll walk you through. We're going to be looking at how cases, hospitalizations, and death compare in American Indian or Alaskan Natives, Asians, Black or African Americans, and Hispanics compared to non-white persons. And I don't even need to do a very detailed job. You can see for yourself that across the board, those numbers are much higher than their white counterparts. You can see that, anywhere from 0.6 to almost 2 times more likely to get COVID than white people. In hospitalizations, those numbers skyrocket. You see it go from 1.2 times in Asians to 4.1 times, and almost 4 times more likely in Latinx and the Black population. And the same for deaths, where you can see up to 3 times more likely in these populations. This is even more devastating when you look at the pie chart above, where you can see that those ethnicities comprise such a small part of the overall population. And so that impact is even more devastating when you think about it in those terms. This is just another way of looking at this, where we can see that, through January 19th, Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders were most likely to have contracted COVID, with that just over 7,700 cases per 100,000 people. And then when you're looking at deaths, that number highest in the Black or African American population, with 142 per 100,000 people, most likely to have died. But then we think about, data. My good friend, Dr. Corey Bradley, always says that data is justice. Data is power. We cannot impact policy and move the needle if we don't have data. And so what's been really disappointing to see is the availability of data in people who live with disabilities. This map shows you that there are 20 states that do not have data available and collected. This is through February of this year, that can give us a sense of what's happening in this community. And that is just not acceptable. Now, I will say that we do have a voice where there is some overlap, right? For people living with disabilities who are from ethnic backgrounds, for people with disabilities who have chronic medical conditions. So there are still things that we can say to help protect and to help honor this community, but it's absolutely unacceptable. And we've got a long, long way to go in ensuring the rights and liberties and equity, health equity, is maintained within this population as it should. And so one of the places where advocacy is going to be key is in the availability of data for these groups. And this will require someone who sits on the Board of Health for the city of St. Louis really taking this to your county and city health departments, to your state, and then to the highest level of government to make sure that we are providing data that reflects this. I will say that there's been some forward movement. The WHO has produced a very comprehensive document on COVID-19 within the context of people living with disabilities. It's very comprehensive and looks at it from a top-down approach all the way to the individual. Johns Hopkins has now started a dashboard to give data specifically around this population. And so we're beginning to see the needle move to where it needs to be. So now I'm going to do a little bit of background, just a little bit of teaching about common parts of COVID that I think are of concern in the community, and that I do get a lot of questions about. So the first is, what's going on with variants and what are they? Well, I am an infectious disease physician, public health expert, and we understand in virology, the study of viruses, that most viruses produce variants. It's just the natural course of what they do. In fact, even though we only started really talking about variants at the end of last year and beginning of this year, we knew that there were variants that had already popped up since the beginning of the pandemic. The only difference is some variants just don't do anything. They're not of any significance clinically or at a public health level. They don't do anything bad at a signal level. And so the first time we started to get really worried was at the end of last year, when the B117 variant and the B1351 variants in the United Kingdom and South Africa became more prevalent. They were more easily transmissible, meaning more easily to be able to spread from one person to another. And in the case of the South African variant and now the Indian variant, the B1617 variant, first detected in India, we're seeing that for some of these variants there can be an increased chance of having more severe disease as well. And so those variants are of concern. And what I like to tell folks is that the CDC is your best trusted resource to keep up with this if it's of concern to you. They have, and this is straight out of the CDC, lists of which are the variants of concerns. They have maps to make those very readily available for you to keep up. And they'll tell you why they are of concern and what is being done about it. So I find that to be very helpful. And then for me, the triumph of science, what changed the day, it changed the game, and what I never anticipated, if I'm being honest with you, a year ago, as a pregnant infectious disease physician, no less, that we would have a vaccine available to us with such rapidity. And I think that's why we're all here. We're all trying to understand how this came about. Can we trust it? And ask questions about how it impacts us, the people we love in our communities. And so those vaccines came about. We started administering them in the US in mid-December. And you can see we have done a phenomenal job of getting vaccines into people's arms, with now 70% of the US population being vaccinated. This month, President Biden wants us to do a month of action to make sure that we still continue to vaccinate folks now, especially with adolescents between the age of 12 to 15 being eligible for vaccination. So how does this work? So how does the Pfizer, Moderna, COVID-19, that mRNA vaccine we keep hearing about work? Well, I'm going to walk you through this little diagram before you. So the first thing we'll talk about, is the mRNA, for spike protein. So the mRNA is a tiny, tiny, tiny microscopic, can't see it not visible to the eye, piece of DNA, meaning that it holds genetic code to create the protein of coronavirus. So it gets injected into your arms, goes right directly into the cells of the body, and once inside, triggers a mechanism to then build this protein. Once that spike protein is built, it sits on the surface of cells. So it travels from inside the cell all the way to outside and sits on the surface of the cell, and then sends basically an alert, alerting your immune system, hey, I'm here, I'm a new protein you've never seen before. You need to create antibodies to be able to attack me if you're ever to see something like me. Everything that gets injected to you is no longer in your system after 48 hours. And all you have left is this wonderful, incredible army of cells that are ready to go if they were ever to see coronavirus or be exposed to it in the future. So that is how the Pfizer, Moderna, COVID-19 mRNA vaccine works. So then, so what we know now is that we have both the Pfizer and Moderna, and we'll start with those. We know that they're made out of mRNA. We know that they're highly effective, 94.5 and 95% respectively. We know that both of them need 2 shots, one 3 weeks after the first shot in the sense of Pfizer, and one 4 weeks after the first shot in the case of Moderna, and they have all been authorized by the FDA. We also have a third one, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It works a little differently. It uses a viral vector, so a different type of virus that helps to teach the immune system to do the exact same thing I described before. It is the range of 66 to about 72% effective, depending on sources that you look at. And I always try to remind people that you can't compare those directly, because the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was developed and went through clinical trials at a time when the case positivity rates were different in the United States, and where different things were happening around it. So you can't make direct comparisons, but what we know is we have 3 highly effective vaccines on the market. I would get any one available to me for myself or my family. The first available vaccine is the right one, and that has the advantage of being a 1-shot vaccine. But we have to address the elephant in the room. We know that a few months ago, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine hit the news hard about a rare but serious condition involving blood clots and low platelets in people after receiving it. So what happened here? So what we saw was up to 17 people, most 16 of whom were women, out of almost 7 million doses that were seen. So again, very rare, who got these blood clots. These women ranged in age between 18 and 49 years old. And And we saw that it would create this blood clot. And so what happened was there was a pause created across the board in using this vaccine for about a week or so that the FDA did. And everyone thought, well, if they paused it, it must be bad. No, they were transparent with us. You know, for those of us in communities that have a history of mistrust, this was a really important pause. That pause was needed so that they could, the focus was not really around the clots. They wanted to take time to investigate how those clots worked and find out more about them, but it was really to provide physicians, people like me, with information on how to talk to the public about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and also to prepare hospital systems to be ready to treat them if this rare, again, very rare, but serious clot happened. And so now what I tell people is, if you are a woman between the age of 18 to 49, and you're considering the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, have that conversation with your doctor and, you know, talk about the risks and benefits of it, and then you can make the best decision for you. So when we talk about these numbers, these really, really concerning numbers, and especially what's happening disproportionately in communities that are marginalized, but communities of color, I want to talk a little bit about history so that we can understand why people sometimes have what I think of as a very valid mistrust. I don't like the term vaccine hesitancy because I think it trivializes, makes light of valid concerns that people have that are absolutely valid, absolutely warranted, given what some of these communities have experienced. And this goes all the way back to slavery, folks. The history of human experimentation is as old as the practice of slavery. During those times, Black bodies were considered property. They had no rights. They could not say, yes, I want to do this, or no, I don't want to do this. And without those legal rights, atrocious things in the name of science happened. And I'll give you a few examples. Here, first, a quote from a visiting French doctor, Harriet Martineau, in 1835, who was visiting the United States and is quoted as saying, in Baltimore, the bodies of colored people exclusively are taken for dissection because the whites do not like it and the colored people cannot resist. Theodore Weld, another physician of the time, says public opinion would tolerate surgical experiments, operations, and processes performed upon them, referring to slaves, which it would execrate if performed upon their masters or other whites. And there are many examples here, all atrocious. The first is from Thomas Hamilton, a physician of the time, who had a slave loaned to him and sat him naked on a stool in a pit that had been heated to really high temperatures with only the man's head above ground. Over 2 to 3 weeks, he fed the slave in that pit to determine how well he could withstand the heat. And with each ordeal, only when fed fainted and had to be revived did the experiment stop. This done only to see how long slave masters could make slaves work on the hottest of days. Marion Sims, thought of by most as the father of modern gynecology, used 3 Alabama slave women to develop an operation to repair these erroneous connections between the uterus and the urinary system. So they're called vesicovaginal fistulas, which is just an inappropriate connection that shouldn't be there. And he's quoted as saying, her whole urethra and her bladder were in a high state of inflammation, which it had to come away. There was nothing to do but to pull it away by force. She was in agony, so much pain, and I thought she was going to die. But by irrigating, I recovered and she recovered. At the time, anesthesia was widely available, but wasn't offered to these Black slaves. Only when he'd perfected the technique did he offer the technique with anesthesia to white women. And then Henrietta Lacks, a young 31-year-old woman in 1951 who died from complications of terminal cervical cancer, was treated at Johns Hopkins University. Upon her death, her physician, Dr. George Gay, removed her cervical cells from her body without consent. She had no idea, she did not offer consent. And those cells, HeLa cells, are widely known to doctors like myself because we use them for research and experimentation and have done since then. Her family didn't even know that the cell cultures existed or had been removed from her body after her death until more than 20 years later. And to this day, there has been no formal acknowledgement, consent, or compensation around that. And these are just a few examples, but we cannot finish this talk. We cannot do that without discussing the Tuskegee experiment that ran from 1932 to 1972. This was a group of 600 Black men from Macon County, Georgia, who were being treated for syphilis, for which there was no known treatment. They were told this would be excellent for them. This would be a public health service that would help them and give them free health care. And so for those 40 years, they were followed. Penicillin, which still is the treatment of choice to this day, became widely available 10 years later, but was never offered to these men for 30 years. 30 men, 28 men, I beg your pardon, died from syphilis. 100 more passed away from related complications. At least 40 spouses were diagnosed, and even more horrific, 19 babies born with congenital syphilis. The legacy of this experiment, with its failure to educate the study participants and treat them equally and adequately, laid the foundation for today's pervasive sense of Black distrust of public health authorities. Dr. Stephen Thomas is quoted as saying. And so it's important to understand that this has happened across other communities. In the Latin community, in the between the 1930s and the 1970s, approximately 1/3 of Puerto Rico's women of childbearing age were sterilized without consent to control the population and decrease the high level of poverty and unemployment. In the 18th century, North American colonists intentionally gifted blankets contaminated with smallpox to Native Americans, killing at least 30% of the Native population. And this has happened throughout other populations like the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. And so this sets the scene for health disparities, which are defined as the preventable differences in the burden of disease, injury, violence, or opportunities that limit our ability to achieve optimal health or socially disadvantaged racial, ethnic, and other populations. Our communities with people with disabilities experience this in very real ways, are left behind, are set aside, are not given access and equitable health care. And that creates a health disparity within our system that can no longer be tolerated. We see this and these numbers exceedingly across all health conditions. Let's be clear, COVID-19 joins a long list of conditions for which this is true. You can see here across the board in high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, and all-cause mortality. In purple, Black people most likely to suffer from these conditions and die. So COVID-19 joins a long list. You see a familiar face, that's me right there on the screen. In May of last year, I gave birth to the most beautiful baby girl. And I remember being pregnant at the beginning of this pandemic and already being extraordinarily stressed as an infectious disease physician because we were thrown to the front line to lead the charge and to help address this deadly pandemic. And a month later, I found myself in May, which also happened to be Maternal Fetal Health Month, where I was being bombarded with statistics about how Black women are 3 times more likely to die than white women during childbirth. And I was scared. I remember going to the doctor, an incredible doctor, a male obstetrician and gynecologist, Dr. Philpott, who we usually used to have very sort of light-hearted banter because I was grateful to have a pretty normal pregnancy. But that visit was different. I sat on the edge of the bed, and when he asked me, like he does, if I had any questions, I teared up and told him how scared I was and what I was learning and what these statistics showed, and how already I may not even be able to have my husband in the room because of the COVID rules, and let alone my mother and family members, but to also have this anxiety around this statistic that I was 3 times more likely to die than my white counterparts was absolutely crippling. He looked at me in the eye and he says, "I got you." And I'll never forget it. My baby came a week early on a weekend, and he worked in a service where whoever was available to deliver the baby would come into the hospital. But the nurses called him, out of respect, just to tell him. And he said, "Oh no, I'm coming in from home." And the nurse said, "Oh no, your partner's here. She's gonna deliver the baby." And he said, No, you don't understand. Me and her, we have a thing. I promised her. I told her I got her. It's hard for me to get through this without tearing up again. And I get emotional about that because I'm privileged, right? I had a doctor who I could connect to on that level, but that is not the case for other women of color, other women with disabilities around the world who have these disparities against them in that and so many other diseases. And so it's important for you to then understand how we got here. This is how we got here. This is why there are disproportionate numbers and why people have such a deep mistrust for the very institutions that are supposed to serve them and protect them. So what else is will also make someone more at risk for getting COVID? We can talk about a few other things, chronic medical conditions being, the lead here. We know that people with heart disease, lung disease, kidney disease, diabetes, and a list of other chronic medical conditions are more likely to suffer from and die from COVID. We know that inequities, the ones that I just described, are also going to be some of the reasons why folks are not able to enjoy the same level of equitable healthcare as others are. We know that poverty, right? The ability to pay your bills, the ability to live in more than a small living space with multiple people crammed in means you don't have the same level of safety and the ability to social distance. We know that the ability to pay for working internet, right? At a time when we need to sign up for vaccines and that's all online or with a working phone, what happens to people who are poor and cannot afford a working phone or working internet? These are all things that get in the way. Essential jobs, we know that communities, marginalized communities and communities of color comprise the high high number of people who work in essential jobs. And I'm not just talking about healthcare, I'm talking about food services, transportation services, government jobs, which means two things. Number one, they don't get to telework at home. They don't get to just stay at home and telework. And number two, they by definition are more likely to be exposed to COVID just by the nature of their work. Educational barriers, and I talk about language barriers, and I mean both verbal but sign language, and the ability to get resources that folks can use to be able to really understand what's happening around COVID and the vaccine. And then a lack of access to key resources, as I spoke about earlier. So it shouldn't surprise you that medical mistrust exists, that there is no trust for the dominant culture in communities that have been left behind, that this results in poor outcomes, and that this also results, this is a combination of historical events, personal experience, and these social determinants of health, the things that get in the way of us being able to access healthcare. Do you have a card to be able to get to a vaccine or to a doctor's office? Are you able to eat and have food that even gives you the energy to not only be healthy, but to get to these places? So many other social determinants of health that really need to be addressed if we're going to be able to. And we know for a fact that when we're in the throes of what we call an emergency response, we don't think about accessible health for people with disabilities as well. And so all of these things create barriers for people being able to access their best available health. And so it shouldn't surprise you that because of this prevalent mistrust, folks didn't want to, from these communities, didn't want to partake in clinical trials. An example of one such community is the Black community, where you can see 5 to 10%, if you're lucky, of people will enroll in clinical vaccines. And this is data from 2015 through 2019. We also did surveys to look at the percent of adults who said they would definitely or probably get a COVID vaccine if it were available today. I have 2 different time points that these surveys were done. At the end of last year, they were done, and overwhelmingly the Black community said that they would probably not get a vaccine if it were available, with less than 50% and as low as 30% saying that they would get a vaccine. But then, like I said to you earlier, trusted messengers with trusted resources really did the work here. I like to consider myself one of them. And we did a similar survey, national survey, about a month ago, and look what it showed. Those same communities are now the lowest as far as a lack of vaccine confidence, with now 49% of GOP men, 41% of Republicans, and 40% of white non-college educated men saying they would not get a vaccine if available to them. So we need to understand that it's very dynamic and very different and very personal as to why folks may not want to get a vaccine. And we need to be thoughtful about that. You know, folks who live in rural communities have a whole host of different challenges than folks in the cities. Folks from different ethnic backgrounds, folks living with disabilities, these are completely different. And it's not a one-size-fits-all or a copy and paste approach, which is why conversations like today are so important, so that we can get to the heart of what needs to be done. And so what I hope to do today is to really open it up for us to discuss now some of the facts and some of the myths around it, and just have a really honest dialogue about our concerns. I think we've created a lot of time here that allows us to do so. So I'll start with a few things that people have asked me over time. The first thing I get is, well, how was a vaccine made so quickly? How is that even possible? We don't even have a vaccine for HIV, for example. I think that's an excellent question. And what folks need to understand is we didn't make these vaccines out of thin air just starting last year. Researchers, including Dr. Kizmika Corbett, one of the leads for the vaccine initiative at the NIH, who is also a Black woman, started developing the mRNA technology years ago. But with now this unique time, I mean, think about it, guys. Never in the history of mankind has the whole world stood still. Everyone, governments, communities, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, all had every available resource moved into this one thing. I'll tell you, we have had record volunteer participation in clinical trials for this. And so that makes an impact. We haven't had that before, to that impact. And while SARS-CoV-2, the actual virus that causes this disease, was new to us, the coronavirus family was not. I'll tell you, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, me waddling around the hospital, big old pregnant lady, and the nurses would stop me and say, "Oh my gosh, doctor, we have so many coronavirus positive patients." And I'd say, "Oh, send me the labs." And it would be coronavirus positive, but they're just talking about the family, not exactly the SARS-CoV-2, which should tell you that we had information in general about that coronavirus family. No steps were overlooked. Nothing was sidestepped in developing this vaccine. We did all the necessary steps. And as someone who comes from a community that has valid mistrust, I'll tell you, the reason I'm so passionate about this and I do this work now is because my background gives me access to things that you may not have access to. And one of those things is understanding that vaccines cannot be authorized without external review boards. People who are not in Pfizer, who are not in these hospitals that did the research, who don't have a vested interest, who come from a vast diverse backgrounds, doctors, scientists, pharmacists, public health experts, and other folks who take a look at that data with a fine-tooth comb, and only then, after it's gone through these rigorous review processes, is it approved. So this was not something that was fast-tracked. This was something that went through all the same steps we expect of every vaccine, but the nature of the virus itself, the fact that we've done a lot of this work, and the incredible vast amount of resources allowed us to get there faster. And to get there in this record time. And it's an absolute triumph of science. Other questions I'm asked are, what about side effects? What do those look like? So I'll use myself as an example. I took the Pfizer vaccine in December of last year, and 3 weeks later, I got the second shot. I am a notorious baby. about vaccines. The nurses have a field day with me. They're just like, what kind of doctor is afraid of needles? And I'm like, this doctor. I am a whiny baby. My husband was like, you need to be a grown-up about getting your labs drawn when you're pregnant for our baby, because you're carrying a whole human, a whole human. But it's just hard for me. So it wasn't a walk in the park for me, trust me, to go get this vaccine. And I remember that day and being really anxious and sitting down and kind of clenching my teeth like I do. And the needle is so much smaller, and it was a much smaller prick than some of the other vaccines that I've experienced, like the flu vaccine every year. I had no side effects for about the first 6 hours or so. And then I felt like an arm heaviness. It wasn't a pain as much as like a discomfort, and you could just feel it in your arm. And that lasted about 12 hours, half a day. And after that, I had no symptoms. After the second shot, I had that, but I also had some fatigue and muscle soreness throughout the day. And that is absolutely normal. What we know from the trials is that you can have fever, chills, muscle aches, fatigue, even nausea and vomiting, and headaches after getting the COVID-19 vaccine. And we saw that in hundreds of thousands of people that were looked at, and all the people that have gotten the vaccine who continue to send, if they so choose, information about their side effects. We now have a wealth of data to show that these side effects are temporary. They last no more than 48 hours in most cases, maybe a little bit more in some. And everyone that I've asked say it is more than worth it to be protected. And then some of the other questions I get are around vulnerable populations, pregnant women and children. So for pregnant women, I like to remind people that while the initial trials were not open to pregnant women, right? They were women in the trial, women that were sexually active, some of them, women that were getting it on, and some who became pregnant as a result. And so even though they weren't, they did not start the trials as pregnant, a lot of women during the course of the trial became pregnant. And the most beautiful thing happened where we saw that they stayed healthy through their pregnancy, and then they had their babies, and we had antibody tests, and we were able to test, and the babies had antibodies. So these moms, and aren't we superwoman moms, were able to protect their babies just by virtue of taking the COVID-19 vaccine. We know from influenza that if you take an influenza shot when you're pregnant, babies can't make their own immunity for up to 6 months. And what have we seen? 6 months, those antibodies from that vaccine last in the babies to protect them. So the same thing is what we're beginning to see. And now pregnancy trials have been open since early this year for pregnant women. So we should have that data equivocal. We have also seen Pfizer give incredibly effective and safe data for adolescents 12 to 15 so they can be vaccinated. But it's our young kids that are not. And as a mom, I'm very sensitive to this. So for those populations, I say, they need to continue to mask when they're able to, social distance, especially indoors, wash hands, all of the things that we have advised up till this point, you think about for any population that cannot get a vaccine right now, which include our babies. And so I'll stop there because those are some of the common questions, and I see the questions are lighting up in the chat and in the question and answer. I hope this has been helpful, and I really look forward to us talking more about this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. You are absolutely right. The questions have been coming in the chat via the Q&A as well as in the email. So I'm trying to capture them all, and I'm glad that we've left so much time for questions and answers. So I'll kick us off with some of the questions that we've received. Dr. Davis, as a physician and a public health official, we're seeing the terms like vaccination hesitancy, vaccination consideration. How would you characterize the moment that we're in right now?
You know, I would characterize the moment as a moment of learning, because even I'll be honest, I used the term vaccine hesitancy a lot in the beginning of the pandemic. You know, I came out of my my maternity leave in August, and I thought, what is my role? What do I need to do? And my career changed. I needed to be a representative as a Black woman, as an immigrant, as an infectious disease doc. And immediately I hit the ground running using terms like vaccine hesitant, but I learned, right? I learned how insensitive that term can be to folks who have valid mistrust. When you look at the history, the brief history I just gave you, I mean, there's semester and year-long courses on that very history. And understand it, you understand that there's nothing hesitant about people. I believe vaccine considerate is appropriate, deliberative, but vaccine confidence, I think, is what I like to use, and be positive about it and talk about getting people to their greatest level of vaccine confidence, even if they may not be there yet. So an excellent question, and we'll continue to learn. I'm continuing to learn about insensitive terms that I use in other places, and I think that's okay. It's okay to say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I'd like to learn, but we have to want to, and we can't expect that to happen passively or by osmosis. We've got to want to do the work.
Thank you. I see Alicia Contreras has a question, and I'm going to click allow to talk. Alicia, if you could unmute to ask your question, that would be great.
Before I got the vaccine, my concern that I had asked them was like, how is this going to affect the baby that I was breastfeeding?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we're seeing the same level of immunity or signs that you see the same level of immunity that we're seeing in pregnant women who got the vaccine, and that, you know, those antibodies exist in breast milk. So mom gets the vaccine, she gets antibodies, those antibodies are in the breast milk, and they transfer to baby, which can only be a positive thing. So I believe that that's a really positive part of this, and how empowering as a mother. If someone could have offered me a vaccine when I was pregnant, my goodness, I would have been so grateful. And so to have that opportunity is great. I'll tell you that the CDC, Johns Hopkins, and Harvard, all three of their websites have a really great and helpful section on women who are trying to conceive, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and some of the considerations and questions they may have around this very topic.
Dr. Davis, while we're on the topic of pregnancy, we've had a couple of questions around, I have had an allergic reaction to my birth control. Should I have concerns about a vaccine because of the allergic reaction that I've had in the past due to birth control?
That's an excellent question. The only formal contraindication or reason not to get a COVID vaccine at this time, there's only one reason, and that reason is if you know that you have had a classified side effect. So not, oh, I felt really bad with one vaccine 10 years ago. That's not a, you may not have liked it, but that's not an allergy or an allergic reaction, where it is documented that you have an overt allergic reaction to a prior vaccine, or if you have a known allergy to any component of this vaccine. So the CDC has a page, if you just Google allergic reaction, COVID vaccine, and CDC or something like that, it'll pop up for you. And it has a page that goes through what all the ingredients of the vaccine are. And if you have a known allergic reaction, then that's the only people that we say shouldn't get that. Even people who are immunocompromised or on immunocompromised medicines or chemotherapy, there is no overt contraindication, but we do say have that conversation with the doctor that's taking care of whatever that condition is, or who is prescribing whatever those medications are, because it may be better timing. I mean, it makes sense, right? You would want to take the vaccine at a time where your body is healthiest and strongest to be able to build that immunity. And if you're going to feel crummy, you don't want to feel crummy at a time where you're weakest either, right? If you're going to have those 2 days maybe of side effects that I discussed. So the only contraindications, the only time you should not take the COVID vaccine is if you have a known allergic reaction to a prior vaccine or to one or more components of the current vaccines. And the CDC can let you know what those components are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. And, you know, so if you do have a history of having a reaction, an allergic reaction, CVS, Walgreens probably aren't the best places to go to get your vaccine. You should really schedule that with your primary care physician, your doctor, and have it in a more medical setting. Is that accurate statement?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Again, still on the expecting moms or wannabe moms. There's some questions around vaccines causing infertility. Have you heard much data on that, or can you speak?
A lot of concerns here, and I get this topic all the time from moms with young teenagers who are wary of this, and seems to be an urban legend that is really spread fast throughout the community. And listen, your body is your temple, and I can completely understand having fears, but I really want to be clear when I say there is absolutely no data to suggest infertility at all. Like I said, we've had women who started at the beginning of the vaccine trials and last year, who subsequently became pregnant and have had healthy babies. We have absolutely no signal here or worldwide that these vaccines can cause infertility. That's just absolutely not true. And again, those websites that I talked about, the CDC, Johns Hopkins, and Harvard have more information about this for people who are asking for maybe resources that they can go to. The CDC is your first bet. They have incredible pages that make this information accessible in language that you can understand. For those of you who work in community organizations or have family members in printable forms, and that is my go-to for myself and for all my family members. I want to shout out Walter Murray in the chat, who says he's been to Zimbabwe. It's a beautiful country and did AIDS work there. Thank you for your work. And Walter, I agree. Zimbabwe is the most beautiful country on planet Earth.
Wonderful. I see Cindy Misner has her hand up, has a question. I'm going to click allow to talk. And Cindy, you should unmute yourself and you'll be able to ask your question.
Okay. Like in a lot of the flus, you have to get a second. Would we have to get a booster shot for this? I've had my 2 shots.
Yeah.
Now, later on, will I need a booster shot to keep the different types of this virus is gonna, it's not a one shot cures all, is it? Or a booster shot? I've always wondered about that because I, have health issues, and I was just curious about that.
So that's an excellent question. We don't know for sure, but all predictions from the CDC and some of our leading officials say that we'll likely need a booster sometime within the next 6 months to a year. This may or may not be just to be cautious. And why shouldn't we be cautious? If you think about what this pandemic has done to our lives over the last year, we should take every available precaution. And we do this with other vaccines, and it buys us time to continue to perfect this vaccine, to get to herd immunity, and to get back to the normalcy we all crave. Now, there is new data that came out about 2 weeks ago that shows that it looks like predictions from epidemiologists and researchers is that the immunity from folks like you, Cindy, who got your 2 shots, who got your vaccine, or even in the case of Johnson & Johnson and other 1-shot vaccines, that vaccine, that the belief is that that immunity should last up to a year. That's fantastic news, at least, is what they're saying, at least. So again, we're learning as we go, Cindy. I can't give you textbook answer right now, but I definitely believe that we probably will get a booster within the next 6 to 12 months, whether it's because we actually need one and the data shows that, or out of an overwhelming sense of precaution to make sure that we continue to move forward towards our new normal and not go backwards. So yes, I think you should anticipate a booster sometime within that range.
Great, thank you very much.
And Dr. Davis, I've already had COVID. Do I need to get my vaccination?
Well, you guys ask all the good questions. I like it here. We should hang out all the time. So yeah, absolutely. It makes sense that if I've had it, I probably have immunity, so I shouldn't need a vaccine. The immunity that you get from a vaccine is different from the natural immunity from getting COVID. And an example of that is I've had people who've had COVID twice. I've had people who got it at the beginning of last year, and I've taken care of them again at the end of last year or this year. So absolutely you need a vaccine because you do not know how long that natural immunity lasts, and there's signals to suggest that it may not be as long lasting as what we get from vaccines. And also to be safe, I would never bet with my life in that way. And I'll tell you, even for people who got mild COVID, some of these long COVID symptoms we're seeing that go on and on and on. I have people who are a year out who still don't walk with the same ease and able to breathe the same a year out. I have people who still can't smell or taste and still feel very weak. And these are young people even across the gamut. So you cannot take a chance. You definitely need to get the COVID vaccine regardless of whether you got COVID. Now, the CDC is clear that the timing of it is important. You should only get the vaccine after you've completed the required quarantine and you no longer have symptoms. So symptoms must be gone and you're no longer within the quarantine period. It also says you can wait up to 3 months from that time where you were first diagnosed. I would say, why wait? But that is how the CDC recommends when you should take it if you've already had COVID.
Great, thank you. And there's a couple of questions that around side effects from the vaccination. And you mentioned a few, the heavy arm, the sore arm. Have you heard any trends around it impacting vision or other conditions, sinusitis, things like that?
No. Sometimes things are what we call in science true, and unrelated. Meaning it's true you got the vaccine, it's true you got the side effect, but that doesn't mean they're related, they're unrelated. And so until our scientists gather enough data to say, no, actually, this is a causal thing where the vaccine causes the symptom, you cannot say that. So you're gonna hear people who say, well, after I got the vaccine, I got sinusitis. Well, they probably would have gotten that sinusitis even if they hadn't got that vaccine. It was just coincidentally around the same time. So there's no causal link to things like vision or anything else outside of the list I gave you. And that list is updated on the CDC's website, like I said, so you should always check there. But that doesn't mean, again, this is a pandemic, we're learning as we go. We may learn more about some of those side effects, but to this time, again, we've had over 100,000 people in the US enrolled in clinical trials through October of last year. And then we have over 200 active trials around the world. And then we've had all of those people, we've watched them as they've gone, and there are people who got the vaccine who had the option of texting and or through a computer service letting people know what their side effects are. That's a lot of people, folks, and we haven't seen a big signal outside of those main symptoms that I gave you.
Thank you. You know, there are other countries that have developed other vaccines by different names. AstraZeneca, Sinovac.
Mm-hmm.
Those aren't approved here, and right. So
those are important though, because you know we have to be concerned about us and where we live, but at the same time, we're a global community, and global vaccine equity is still very much an issue, and an issue that really worries me. Obviously, it's personal. All my family live in Zimbabwe and South Africa, South Africa being the country that has the most deadly strain right now. And that's hard, and they don't have access to Pfizer or Moderna or even Johnson & Johnson as of yet. And so I had to make this decision for my mom. Only the Sinovac or Sinopharm is the other version of it. The Chinese vaccine was available for her in Zimbabwe. And I had to advise her and weigh the risk and benefit. On the one hand, we didn't have the same robust data that we do with Pfizer and Moderna. We didn't, and certainly the data that we did have did not show as high efficacy. But I had, it came down to for me was some protection is better than none. And I took that advice from Dr. Anthony Fauci when asked the same question. So this is why we have to understand the high level of privilege and fortune, good fortune we have in this country to have safe, effective vaccine that have gone through the highest level of clinical trials, because folks like my mom don't have that. So she went and got the Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccine. For some people, they may decide when Pfizer or another vaccine becomes available later that they will get another shot. There's no clinical trials to show whether that's effective or if that has issues. But again, in places where choices are limited, you have to make alternative decisions. AstraZeneca had great efficacy data and safety data, but did also have the same issue around rare but serious blood clots. So that has to be taken into effect. And in the same way I talked about Johnson & Johnson, you have to have a risk and benefit estimation. If you're in a country where there's no other vaccine and the case positivity rate, the number of cases in that country is through the roof, and you have AstraZeneca and you're otherwise healthy, you may take it. Whereas if you're in the United States and you have choices, you may opt to take another vaccine. It's all about where you are and what your risk benefit analysis is. And unfortunately, that is not the same for everybody.
Dr. Davis, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has approved for emergency use currently. At what point will it be approved rather than just for emergency use? Is there any speculation on when that might be made a permanent approval?
So permanent approval is pending sometime this summer, we believe. But again, sometimes there's not a big rush to get to permanent approval because it takes a lot of like administrative paper pushing, where the emergency authorization works just fine. So I think folks think of permanent approval as some sort of signal that we have better data. That's not the case. It wouldn't be in use if the data was not awesome and great and safe and effective. And so honestly, they may drag their feet. And there's other sort of legal implications and profit and business implications to getting that drive when people get it and at what time. So I wouldn't use that as a marker of saying something significant other than that. These are safe vaccines, they're effective vaccines. We wouldn't be putting them in arms. I certainly wouldn't be putting them in my husband's arm or my baby's arms if I didn't believe that data was sound.
Thank you. I see Marshanda DeGrot has a question. I'm going to click allow to talk, Marshanda, and you should be able to unmute your microphone and ask your question live.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Marshanda. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. My biggest question is I didn't catch COVID, or well, it wasn't visible. I may have been asymptomatic, I don't know. And my children did not either. So my biggest concern is, if I didn't get COVID, is it possible that the vaccine would cause me to have a negative reaction? Is there, because what did happen was I ended up having flare-ups that I never had before. That's something that I seen, but I never received any COVID behavior at all. So I was just concerned that might be harmful to me if I'm not susceptible to COVID, or wasn't susceptible to COVID at the time.
Absolutely not. So it's not that you weren't susceptible. Let me get this straight. So you don't know if you got COVID. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, all my tests were negative. I never tested positive for COVID, and I never seen any symptoms of COVID.
Okay, so you've never had it. You've never had it to your knowledge. All your tests were negative, and you're worried that maybe the vaccine would not work as well in you for some reason.
I'm worried that the vaccine may be harmful to me because I was able to fight it or not receive it, or
Yeah.
So that's my biggest concern.
No,
I have a health condition that is pretty serious, so I don't want to, I don't know what to do in this case.
You don't want to put yourself in harm's way. It's an absolutely valid question. So number one, you either didn't get COVID because you did the things we asked you to do: social distance, masked, washed your hands, and were thoughtful about all of those things, or you were fortunate. Some people just were fortunate even if they didn't carry out those conditions. That doesn't mean that for some reason you were more or less susceptible. And certainly, I actually am more passionate about people who have serious underlying conditions getting the vaccine, because if you have higher risk because you're immunocompromised, which we know is a risk factor, if you're from communities like Black, brown communities where you're at risk, the way I like to tell people is you've got to think about the risks and benefits of getting a vaccine versus the risks and benefits of getting COVID, which includes serious illness and death. And to me, that question is clear. I think most people, when they're thinking about it, they think about the vaccine in a vacuum. Well, I don't want to get the vaccine. It could hurt. It could do this, or I could just do nothing. That's not the choice. The choice is the risks and benefits of a vaccine versus the risks and benefits of getting COVID. So because you have a serious condition, you're not going to be harmed by the vaccine. There's nothing to suggest. We're giving the vaccine to people living with HIV, with cancers, with who are on chemotherapy or who are on immunosuppressants, and there is no damage to them or risk to them. There's only protection. Now, I will say that there have been some, people who if you go get the vaccine, people will tell you that you have to wait 15 minutes to be observed to make sure nothing happens. And we have seen people have mild allergic reactions that go away. And in over 100,000 people, maybe a side effect that required them to be in the hospital for a day or two and then go home and be fine. No deaths have been reported from a COVID vaccine, but there have been deaths reported with getting COVID. So what I tell people is vaccine, vaccine, vaccine all day long, you know, and if your concern is that the vaccine itself could do something to you, especially with your sensitive situation, that's not the case. We've been doing this across the gamut from people with a host of different conditions. Does that help, or did you have an additional concern?
No, that's perfect. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Marshanda. Again, folks, raise your hand to ask questions. It gives me time to look for my next question. So, Dr. Davis, folks after they've been vaccinated can be tested for antibodies. Are you hearing success rates there, or cases where they're not after being vaccinated, not testing that they don't have the antibodies? So is there anything out there around testing after the vaccination and ensuring that you have the antibodies?
So antibody tests are a whole different beast. You can't use them the same way that you'd use screening tests for COVID. Their best use is at population levels to be able to tell us how well we're doing at a big level approach, in which case we know we've been doing great. They've been helpful, for example, when I talked about making sure babies have antibodies, but we don't use them. They don't do well on individuals, because that's what a lot of people do. I just want to know if I had COVID, so I'm going to go get an antibody test. And we know that at the individual level, you have a much higher risk of getting false positives or negatives, and then not knowing for sure what that result means. So I like to say that antibody tests are best in the hands of epidemiologists and researchers who are trying to do system levels approach, because at those high system levels, we can adjust for some of the discrepancies that we see. But we're not using those antibody tests at individual levels at this time.
Thank you. And I see Leona Owens has a question. I'm going to press allow to talk, Leona, and you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Hello.
Hi, Leona. Thanks for being here.
Hi. So my question is, as a Black woman, what questions should I be asking my doctor about COVID and the vaccine? I'm already vaccinated, but I was just wondering, just like in general, just in case there's any other Black women out there or Black people in general, what questions should we be asking our doctors when it comes to COVID?
That's a dope question, Leona. Well, you have a Black doctor here, so I did a lot of the work for them, because I like to make sure that we answer the questions that Black people should be asking, like, were people who look like me in the trials? And the answer to that is Pfizer and Moderna took a lot of heat from people like me. I was on CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, wherever they'd let me come. And I always thought they're not going to allow someone with a mouth like me back on. I just, here I am with my fro and my Prince child. I break all the rules. I was told you're supposed to wear pastels and your hair should be straight. And I was like, try again. And I talk about Black, brown communities, and they still have me back. So look at God. But what I like to tell people on those platforms is we applied pressure, and part of that pressure worked, because Pfizer and Moderna, for example, were enrolling for these clinical trials last year, and they didn't have a lot of Black and brown people. And we were like, yep, we've been trying to tell you guys this for years. You have a mistrust issue, and that mistrust started before COVID. Black and brown people have a lot of mistrust with healthcare institutions, as they should, and understandably, based on just a little bit of the history I gave you. So one of the questions is, do those clinical trials represent me? Were there enough people in those trials to say that this vaccine works and is safe and effective for people like me? And the answer is yes. They even slowed down enrollment when they realized, man, we messed this up. We should have thought about this at the beginning. So we're going to have to slow this down. Even though we'd make more money if we got this vaccine out earlier, we're going to slow down enrollment so that we can get more Black and brown folks. And they did. They got it up to 10%. In those communities, not exactly where it should be, but much better. If you remember that pie chart I showed you of the percent we'd make up in the population, so very reasonable. And then you should ask things about your personal concerns. I'm a mama. I want to know about my kids. I want to know about my husband. I want to know, about my personal medical conditions as well. But then I also like just to apply some heat, because if I'm in the room with a city health or county health official, I want to know about access, Because the thing that is really devastating right now is that Black people are no longer the least amount of vaccine confidence. I showed you the figures, but we're still not getting the vaccine. We're getting it less than any other group in this country. So that is an access issue, that is a structural racism issue, and that needs to be addressed. And so what are we doing to equitably make sure that people can get vaccines? But for a lot of us, Leona, you know, the same concerns that any person of any background have, but then there are issues that are very specific to our community, and you should ask those straight up, no chaser.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does that help?
No, it does.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, the next raised hand, I'm not able to make a name out, but it's YSMAELCHESKA. I'm going to click allow to talk, and you can unmute your microphone to ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Davis.
Hi, can you say your name so I know how to say it?
Yeah, sorry, I'm Ismael.
Hi, Ishmael, welcome.
We are interested with your topic right now. So actually, I have a lot of questions, and I think I sent 3 questions. But right now, I just want to ask 1 or 2. So what's the percentage after getting the first and second dose that you will have a critical health problem?
So there's no critical health problems that have been ascribed to the vaccine, but there have been allergic side effects. And the number that we have of people who have had to be observed or even hospitalized for a brief period of time, which is the most that we've seen, is about 1 in 100,000 events. So 1 in 100,000 times. I like to compare that to your risk of getting a side effect from penicillin. If you were to come to me and you had some sort of infection, a rash, a cut, and I would say you need to take penicillin for a week, most of you would just take it without asking me. You have a 1 in 1,000 chance of some sort of a side effect just with penicillin compared to 1 in 100,000 with the vaccine. So there's no critical conditions that have been linked to the vaccine, no death, and no critical condition. You know, the ones that come up are things like Bell's palsy, and a lot of people have questions. That, again, true, unrelated. We have not found causal links, but with the allergic side effects that have been observed with or allergic responses to the vaccine, that's 1 in 100,000.
Can I ask 1 more?
Sure.
So how can we trust the Sinovac vaccine? Because I'm originally from the Philippines.
Yeah.
And we are getting more Sinovac vaccine there in our country. So some with hesitancy.
Yeah.
But it seems there's no problem in the Philippines, and in other countries, they distributed a lot of Sinovac. But
listen,
from
my
you,
friend, it's hard. Like I said, I gave my mom the Sinopharm vaccine. I told her to get it in Zimbabwe. And the decision I made is, what is the case positivity rate? Is there a lot of COVID in that country? And when do they think they could get a vaccine that I think has the most robust data, like a Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, or AstraZeneca? For some countries, that's not till 2022 in some instances, right? So if Sinovac or Sinopharm is available and the case positivity is high, or the individual, even in a low case positivity rate, is from a high risk group, older age, you know, those Black and brown communities, lung, heart, kidney disease, immunocompromised, I believe some protection is better than none. So the way that I would look at it is go to your doctor in that country and then ask, what does the data show? Is it safe and is it effective? If there is enough data, even if it hasn't gone through sort of FDA approval levels, to say that it is safe and effective, even if the efficacy is 50%, the flu vaccine most years is only 50% effective, and look how helpful that's been, then I would say, look at your risk and benefit and then make a personal decision. For my mother, over 65, a Black woman, reasonably high case positivity rate, and no other vaccine seems available for quite some time, I told her to go ahead and get it. She did, she's doing great. And a lot of people, you know, a lot of people from Zimbabwe have gotten the Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccine and are faring reasonably well. So again, it'll take time for us to know for sure what the data is, but it's a rock and a hard place, Ishmael. It's not a perfect answer. We shouldn't be hoarding vaccines in this country. We should be shipping them elsewhere. We should be donating resources so other countries can make their own vaccines. We should be donating money and time. We should be making this equitable. The US bought 70% of the world's vaccines. and has 3 of the best available, where there are countries, like I said, who won't have it in 2022. That is an abomination. What's happening in India and South America and parts of Africa and around the world is devastating. And so those decisions have to be made, difficult decisions, Ishmael, and they're not great decisions, because if Sinopharm or Sinovac were here, it wouldn't be on the market. And so I don't believe my mother should have to make a decision about a product that I would not take here. But at the end of the day, I believe some protection was better than no protection.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
No problem.
Thank you, Ishmael.
I'm also just going to go back to my slides, because I know that we're not going to get through everything today. And I want to make sure folks know how to reach me. So the email address is dated. I'm sorry, but my Twitter handle is on the, because I've left WashU, so that's not an email address you can use. But my Twitter handle does work, and I post a lot of educational things on there. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, like the old aunties who are on there. I'm not great. A lot of times you'll get pictures of my really cute babies. I mean, there's cute babies and then there's my babies. I'm talking cheeks cute. So you'll have to deal with a little bit of that, but I also do a lot of education, my clips when I'm on NBC, CBS, CNN. So they'll oftentimes ask me a lot of the questions you're asking me and what's latest in the news. And if that's of interest to you, you can follow me there. Shameless plug, but I did it. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Joan Williams has a question. I'm going to click allow to talk, Joan, and you should be able to unmute your microphone and ask your question live.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to ask my questions. A couple of things that I wanted to know about is, number one, is there going to be a booster shot for the COVID vaccine and or a yearly shot that we're going to get like the flu vaccine?
So I answered that a little bit earlier, but let me cover it again. Because it can be unclear. You never have to apologize, girl. You can ask me the same question 3-4 times. We are family on this talk, and we will, because I say it one way and it doesn't make a lot of sense. I have a loud mouth and I talk very fast. I used to have to read in church at Catholic church when growing up, and my mom would sit in the front aisle and go, so I know I have an issue. I have an accent, and plus, sometimes you have to hear things more than once. I tell my patients all the time, and you should empower yourselves with your doctors. Never be afraid to ask the same question. You can ask that question when you're anxious, when you're trying to keep up with everything, and it doesn't process, and you need to ask it again. So it's absolutely not an issue. So we don't know for sure how long this immunity is going to last. We got some information about 2 weeks ago to say that we think it's going to be at least a year that we have antibodies in our system, which I think is phenomenal. But public health experts have already started to sort of preliminarily prep us for probably a booster in 6 to 12 months, somewhere in that time range, either in response to that data that I just gave you, that it lasts at least a year, or just to be super cautious and make sure we're moving forward and not backwards with this pandemic. So I think 6 to 12 months, Joan, but these things change as we get more and more information. But we just don't know for sure if it's going to be annual, every 5 years, or a one-stop thing, because it takes time to see how long we are all protected as a community as more and more folks are getting vaccinated. How long does that last for us to know for sure when we'll need boosters and with what frequency? Does that help?
It does. What about the variants? What are we doing about the variants?
Yeah, so I showed, and I'm gonna get off stop share and just, we've got some time together so I can do some fun stuff with you guys. And one of the things I can do is I can go to the CDC's website and show you where some of this stuff is. So I'm gonna share screen again. Oh God, I've got too many things open, so. Okay. Bear with me, folks. I try, but I don't always get it right. Okay, can you see a screen with like featured resources and a CDC page open?
Right.
Okay, so if you go to the CDC at any given time, it has COVID-19. It's amazing. Everything is on here, right? If you go to search COVID-19, you can ask whatever question you want. So we're going to talk about variants, right? Mm-hmm. And then it says US 19 cases caused by variants. And there's a beautiful page here. The first page will tell you what are the main variants, how many reported cases for each variant, and how many jurisdictions are reporting those variants. And then in a simpler form, we'll show you which places have most of the variants. So here you can change the variant you're looking for. And so the UK one is here. If I want to look to see what's happening with the South African one, you can see it's not very prevalent because white means 0 to 0, which means 0. And then only 151 to 300. So you can see how it's being reported. If you go down, it tells you more information. And then there's even more things. What are they doing with surveillance? How are they classifying this? And they even teach you about variants of concerns. So what we know is there are some variants of concerns in the US. The India strain, for example, is up to 7%, seen up to 70% of the time in the US, 7%. And so what we do is we keep an eye on them. We start to test in hospitals to see how many people get those variants. But overall, we continue to vaccinate people. And what we're seeing is despite these variants being here, overall cases of the vaccine. So here, if you go to the COVID data tracker, it'll show you what's happening with the COVID in the US. And this is this week. And you can see that since December, on this chart here, cases have just been falling. Look at that beautiful fall.
Wow.
All the way through May. So even though we've had variants since here, we've had variants all the way since here, since vaccination, vaccines work, my love, and we'll continue to do the science in the labs to make sure we understand what's happening with variants and if we need to tweak our vaccines. But at the end of the day, even with these variants around since December, look at what's happening with cases as we're vaccinating folks. The true winner here is vaccines, the most important tool in our toolbox, along with masking for people who are not vaccinated, social distancing, hand washing, all of those things. But look at that, the numbers don't lie. Clearly, since we started vaccinating, cases have just plummeted.
One more thing, you bring up a very good subject, and that is the masking and the social distancing, especially with our population, the developmentally delayed, intellectually disabled population.
Yeah.
As a nurse, I find that, and I work for a regional center, that many of our clients, you know, there's no problem solving outside the box about how to help somebody with the fact that they don't want to use a mask, or they put people in isolation instead of quarantine. I'm also seeing a lot of our clients that are been in a hospital setting, and the care that they get is not the same. It's like they're a throwaway population. And I'm kind of concerned about those kinds of things.
I agree with you. And I think that this is where the advocacy piece is important. So let's spend a little bit of time within this population. Number one, even though there's nothing to suggest that having a disability within itself puts you at risk for COVID, we do know that people living with disabilities do have some of those comorbidities more often.
Right.
Do have caretakers or caregivers who have to be in close proximity. So that's an added level of risk, especially if that caregiver is not vaccinated. Oftentimes live in long care facilities. So facilities where we cannot account for the spread of COVID and it's just higher risk. And that means overall there is risk associated within the community. And we also know that there's a little bit of research to show that people with Down syndrome do have a little bit of higher risk as well. So what that tells me is this is a population we should most certainly be empowering, talking with, educating, putting health dollars and research dollars into. So when it comes to masking, you know, for a lot of people in these communities, people living with disabilities, masking is not practical, or they just can't do it, right? Again, I can't social distance from someone who is required to breathe in my face, is close to me as they take care of me. So you have to empower yourself. Number one, I believe that people living with disabilities absolutely have a right to ask if their caretaker has been vaccinated, because we know now the CDC has told us that vaccinated folks do not have to wear masks, whereas unvaccinated folks still do need to wear masks according to the current guidelines. I believe that where they can mask, they should. And if they shouldn't, they should do everything else available to them. Get a vaccine where available, because it is the most important tool in our toolbox. Wash hands, social distance. And that decision-making about what to do and how to do it, it differs. But I couldn't agree with you more that this is not a one size fits all. And again, I really worry that our communities of people living with disabilities have been left behind in many of these conversations, and those conversations have to come to the front.
Yes, thank you. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Great questions.
Thank you, Joan. Dr. Davis, staying with the population that we're serving, we invited you to speak to the community here in California who supports people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. What are your thoughts on employers requiring the vaccine as a condition of employment?
It's a hard topic. So we've looked at data in countries that have required vaccine mandates, and we know that that doesn't make a huge difference in overall vaccinations. But there are certain populations where vaccine mandates have existed forever. So anyone who works in a hospital knows you have to get a flu shot. It's part of your employment requirement. Your vaccine records have to be made available, and certain vaccines must be available because you're going to be in the care of people and you could put their health at risk if you don't have those protections. The same is true of schools. So, my personal feeling doesn't matter here. Indiana, the biggest hospital in Indiana just made the COVID vaccine mandatory for all of their employers. It's going to get a lot of press. People are going to say what they want to say about it. But at the end of the day, this is not new. For certain environments, this has been going on. This has been a requirement, especially for private, government rules and what people can do in private institutions are different. And in private places, you can privately make whatever rules you want. And the people involved have to choose. What I would say is if it was my mother, father, me, daughter, cousin, aunt, who was living with a disability and had to be given direct care, whether in a facility or by one or more people, I would want them, I don't think it's fair for them to be at risk for something that they fundamentally need. And so if we know that the best tool in our toolbox is a vaccine, we know it's safe, we know it's effective, I do believe that those folks should be asked to vaccinate to protect the people that they want to serve. And if they don't want to, that's a choice, and they don't have to, and they can seek employment elsewhere. But I don't think that folks who cannot vaccine should be put at risk because of a personal choice. Now, everybody on this call can disagree with me. This is where I ain't Fauci, child. I am not the president. I am not the law. And I can only speculate. But what I will say is that this is beginning to happen, and we're seeing signals that it will become more and more common for certain populations.
Thank you, Doctor. Iris Verdusco has her hand up. Iris, I'm going to allow to talk, and you will be able to unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Doctor,
Hi,
I wanted to say thank you for this presentation and also the history and the background why we can be so distrustful. And
you're welcome.
Yes,
it's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's painful, but we have to address these things, and we have to come into community and have these honest conversations so we can move forward. I'm not one to dwell, I'm not one to lay blame, but I am one to say acknowledgement and apologizing, and then paying attention to what needs to be done just is a must. So I appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you. My question is, I heard that if you get they got the 2 shots, somebody I know, that they got the 2 shots and they didn't have any side effects. And her thinking is, well, I didn't get any side effects. I didn't get any antibodies. Is that true?
Oh my gosh, that was so me. So I was like, after the second shot, because you hear that people get a little bit more side effects after the second shot. And when I was relatively okay, I was like, does my body work? What's going on? I was a little worried, but I'm like, come on, girl, you're a whole doctor and public health expert. You know better. And it's just, no, sometimes your immune system, makes you feel it, and sometimes it doesn't. Think about any other vaccine you've gotten. It's not like every other time you've gotten a vaccine, it's been like punch, pow, fireworks, Sometimes you just go home and it's fine. Your immune system just responds differently depending on the day, what's happening around you, etc. And it has no bearing, but I can completely understand that sentiment, because I almost was like, man, I think I would have felt better if I was a little sicker, actually. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason to that.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Alex. John Unuade has a question. John, I'm going to click allow to talk, and you should be able to unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, John.
John, do you want to unmute your microphone?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, guys.
Hi, John.
So first of all, I want to thank you guys for the opportunity for this education. You know, it's wonderful, and I want to thank my organization, STEP, for giving me this opportunity. You know, but one thing I also want to ask for sure is, so I have been vaccinated as early as January,
Okay.
and I took, even though I have my own little doubts, I felt because I serve people, I work with people, the need to protect myself and those people, I took it upon myself, not even calculated the risk of the vaccine.
Good for you.
So, and I took the vaccine, and I got the side effect, a little feverish and all that stuff, which I felt is worth the pain, the sacrifice we have to make. But my question is, having gone through all this, what is the benefit if I have to walk around with my mask on my face every time? You know, because I've also come to realize the mask is becoming more of a spectacle than what it's meant for. If I am vaccinated, I should be expected to walk free without a mask. I mean, that would be a motivation for a lot of Black folks out there, kind of a reward. Look, if you're vaccinated, these little restrictions you got, you don't have to go through them anymore. How about that? We're not talking about that.
Couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, masking along with COVID in general has become very politicized in this country. I remember Dr. Fauci saying that that's the thing that he was surprised most about the COVID-19 vaccine was how highly politicized it was, even more than with HIV. And I think that's what's really muddied the conversation. The CDC is clear. Now that you're vaccinated, John, you don't have to wear a mask. Now, sometimes I think it is, you know, I've been vaccinated, but sometimes if I'm in a restaurant or if I'm in an indoor facility or I'm in, you know, a public setting where it may make other people uncomfortable because again, I can't wear a mask that says, you know, a sign that says I've been vaccinated. But at the end of the day, the CDC is clear. Vaccinated folks do not need to wear a mask indoors or outdoors. That's the recommendation that was made. I have personal feelings about that. I think while that makes sense from the data, from a public health perspective, it's a little bit of a nightmare, you know, for people who own large businesses. There's no way for them to be able to say, are you vaccinated or are you not? We don't have passports. We don't have any way to verify. So it puts them in a difficult position. For parents with young children who can't protect themselves by wearing a mask, it's difficult. So I would say, John, you have every right to make the best decision for you and yourself, but also to be thoughtful about your community. If you're around someone who has a young child that obviously looks uncomfortable, even though you know that you're protected because of your vaccine status, you may just, out of the goodness of your heart, wear a mask, you know? And if you're at a place that still requires them because they're a private business and they're just doing the best they can because they can't check, that's the place that we're at now, which is why I think the mask mandate was a bit difficult for some people. But at the end of the day, John, you're vaccinated, so you don't have to wear a mask.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for sharing and for making that difficult decision. I know that it's not easy, especially, I'm going to make a judgment call here, but are you from close to where I'm from?
Why are you asking me that? I'm from Nigeria.
Come on, man, that accent, I can smell that accent a mile away. And I'm sure when you saw me, you had already judged which part of Africa I'm from.
You don't have an accent. You don't have an accent. I'm originally from Nigeria. So
listen, John, so first of all, don't make me fight you on this webinar, okay? Because what people don't know is Zimbabweans and Nigerians have friendly combat. Second of all, you're right, even though you're shady, my accent has diluted and your beautiful accent is intact. But if I were to call my mother right now, John, you'd hear it fully.
Wow.
But
Okay.
You're absolutely right. You know, from places that we're from, John, you know that back home in Africa, there's even cultural things where people are like, are you joking? Yeah. So I know that for you to do that, it took a lot to even think about those things. And I'm sure you have family members that feel some type of way about what you did. And that's the reality of so many of us on the call, especially those of us from immigrant populations where there's
I got a lot of warning from Africa. Please don't take that stuff.
Yeah.
They're trying to kill you.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, if I have to die, I mean, 500 plus people, 500,000 plus people died for this process. So it's worth the sacrifice, you know? And yeah.
Good for you, John. I mean, we can still be friends, even though you came from my accent, but we can still be friends. Nice to meet you,
Thank you
John.
so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Uh-huh.
And certainly from where I am, Dr. Davis, here in San Francisco, a lot of businesses are requiring you to wear a mask to go in. So it's going to be dependent upon, you know, what their policy is as well as to.
Yeah, they were absolutely put in a rock and a hard place. And so I believe every situation is different, right? If you're having a dinner party at home, you know, all your guests are vaccinated, it's a no-brainer. You guys can all enjoy a dinner party and a meal without masks. But if you own a business that can take up to, you know, over 100, a supermarket, a grocery store, a restaurant, you know, some people are dealing with the difference. You see signs that say vaccine optional, you know, mask optional if you have a vaccine, or just mask optional in general. Or you have places that are requiring them because they don't know what else to do when they can't check. And we have to be considerate and understanding of that until we get to herd immunity. And like I said, unfortunately, you're speaking to a woman who comes from a very, you know, a different part of the world that doesn't have these luxuries. So if the worst thing that has to happen to you is that you got to wear a mask for a few minutes or even a few hours, you're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay.
Thank you. Linda De Laurenti has a question. Linda, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you should be able to unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us today. I'm learning a lot.
Sure.
My question is, what studies are being done on the efficacy of the vaccines for people with chronic health conditions, autoimmune diseases, and on immunosuppressant medications? And do the vaccines work as well for these people as they do for quote unquote normal vaccinated people?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So when we do clinical trials, Linda, we collect a bunch of what we call demographic information. So what's your age? What's your sex? What's your all sorts of background information, because we want to be able to report that this is safe and effective across those realms. So regardless of age, it's effective, sex, all of that. And so we did the same with chronic medical conditions. We know that the vaccine actually does an amazing job of preventing severe illness and absolutely prevents death, and is safe across the gamut. So this is not, it's not like the trials, let me restate that. So we cannot enroll every single person in the trial by any means, but once you have that high level of signal with so many people, that safety and efficacy data can be very reassuring. And then as we go, as we're vaccinated people, we've been vaccinated people who do have these chronic medical conditions, who do are immunocompromised. And again, we are collecting all that data as we go, and both in the US and around the world, there's no signal to suggest that that has any sort of deleterious effect. So those studies are ongoing, but again, that first group that we captured really gave us a sense that this was great. So in answer to your question, it's not like we're having to make up new studies for that. That data is being captured in real time and is ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess because when I Google these things, I'm not able to find that information myself, and I'm in that group.
That category.
It's concerning because I know that they're saying, you know, 94-95% for Pfizer and Moderna, but I don't know. I don't see that they've singled out.
Yeah, look specifically at certain groups. So for example, what is it exactly 94, 95 in diabetics or in people with cancer, right, or something like that, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So again, because of the urgency of this pandemic, we couldn't wait to get the kind of numbers that maybe people wanted to see, millions of diabetics and millions of these people. So we've done the same thing we've done for all vaccines. And again, diabetics and immunocompromised people get all the other vaccines because the data can be reassuring and inferred and extrapolated. And again, in those people, we collect all their comorbid conditions. So we know we had X number of diabetics. We know we had X number of these types of people. And that safety and efficacy data encapsulates them. And again, over time, we continue to. So again, though, Linda, the way I would think about it is this, is Is it the risk and benefit of a vaccine for a diabetic or for your particular condition, or the risk and benefit of COVID in your particular condition, right? And as someone who takes care of these folks in the hospital, I'll tell you, we're talking about 2.5 times more likely to be ventilated, 3 times or more times more likely to die for a lot of these groups, these immunocompromised and chronic medical conditions. That's way more risk than the vaccine. And it's a horrible position to be put in. I don't think that should have to be your choice, Linda. You know what I mean? I shouldn't say worse or worser. I don't believe the vaccine is worse. I think the vaccine is phenomenal. But again, if I were in your position, I would be frustrated too. You know what I mean? You want to be able to have a vaccine that you can say, look at this data for this particular group of people. But babe, you have to remember, we've just had this for a year. You know what I mean? So what we have is an absolute triumph of science. And I would say that, you know, you can obviously DM me privately on my social media if you have a particular concern about your group, and I can try send you that information. But again, it can be extrapolated, and the risk-benefit analysis when comparing to what COVID can do in those conditions is not even comparable.
Yeah, no, I've gotten both my shots. I'm off the vaccine. I think my concern is with taking off my mask. I'm just not there yet.
Yeah, and listen, at the end of the day, John was saying he's frustrated with having to keep it on. If you don't want to take your mask off, don't take your damn mask off. That's how I feel about it. Do you know what I mean? I've had to wear that mask, and there's an emotional attachment. And for people who have, you know, anxiety or depression, which we know is highly prevalent, and even more so in the pandemic, it's a safety blanket. And why take it off if you don't have to? If it's an easy thing for you, you do it, right? But if the data is there to support the fact that across the world, and a lot of this data is actually coming out of Israel, who have almost basically reached herd immunity. And again, this is a hodgepodge of people with immunocompromised illness and all this other stuff, where it sticks, you know, and these vaccines work. We have to get there, but that doesn't dictate when your personal comfort is with taking off the mask. So, you know, be empowered in that. You know, I have friends who are physicians who still want to wear them in certain environments, and that's their right.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem, Linda. Thanks for being here.
Okay, I'm going to go to Marty Emoto. Marty, I'm going to click allow it. Nope, did I allow? Nope, I didn't.
Just want to say this is my longest webinar I've done.
Oh.
I'm hydrating, and I didn't think we'd have a lot, you know, we could fill up 2 hours, but boy, can we fill up 2 hours. I bet you we're probably would have more questions than 2 hours allowed. So I want to really thank, you know, all the folks who have sponsored this webinar for being so intentional about providing a safe space and enough time for people to really talk about what matters to them. I think it's incredible leadership, because like I said, nobody's ever asked me to be on for this long, and look at us go.
And I'm so worried we're not going to get to all these questions. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed because now all the hands are going up, which I love, but it's not enabling me to get to
no, Mark, but we don't worry about that, because again, as my shameless plugging goes, they know where to find me. And if we need to do a part 2, honey, we can organize a part 2
as much is true.
But all I'm saying is, you know, this is great questions, and let's keep them going. Marty, you had a question.
Marty Emoto. First of all, I'm a family member. My older sister had developmental disabilities, and I'm a caregiver now of an adult with Down syndrome. But first of all, hydrate yourself if you want. Go ahead and drink your water. I notice when I come on, you can't. You're parched, huh? So, but first of all, I want to thank you. You have been incredible in giving credible, you know, just really good information to all of us at a really important time, because we're transitioning into reopening the state. And so what you say is so valuable because it's in the way that you say it, and we trust you. My question is, I got COVID a year ago, pretty bad case for about 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And from that point until I got vaccinated, I had some serious long hauler effects. I didn't realize it was related to COVID, rapid heartbeat, memory loss, fatigue. I would actually be on the ground, and nobody knew that this was happening because I was by myself. But I noticed after I took my second shot, about 2 weeks after that, I just noticed I was walking around and realized the symptoms went away. And I was wondering, and I heard on CNN that there was some relationship to the vaccination, but I was wondering through your research if you found anything regarding that, whether it's dealing with the long. And now I'm worried though, will it come back if later?
No, awesome
Thank
question.
you very much.
Awesome question, Marty, and thank you for your kind words. I love your last name. It is very cool. I want to know the origins of it, but we can't play that.
Japanese, but it's Japanese, but I there's an Omoto in Africa. I guess he's some preacher or something. So
that's what I was saying. I thought you were one of us, child, but you're not one of us.
Who knows, right? But thank you.
We can be play cousins, but I was going to say that is an excellent question, and there's actually ongoing research in major institutions right now around that very fact. We started to see a big signal that folks who got the COVID vaccine and had previously gotten COVID, who had these long-lasting symptoms, those symptoms started to wear off. You know, biologically, we can sort of imagine why that would be, that you have immunity from a vaccine, it affects your immune response, makes it more robust, and that may help with some of the healing properties. But we don't know for sure. So a lot of academic institutions are doing that work right now. It's an excellent question. We have no way of knowing how long that's going to last, what it means. So for now, we're just taking the goodness of it and we're continuing to do the research. I just wanted to shout out, I think Martha Lund is in the chat and she's been trying to ask a question and I didn't want her to get frustrated. So I'm just going to read it directly here. You said you've asked twice about hydroxychloroquine and I can't see where you asked about it first. So I'm going to scroll up, but I'm wondering if that's in response to hydroxychloroquine as a treatment. So I'll start there until I find your first question. But hydroxychloroquine was one of the first drugs that we thought may positively treat COVID back at the beginning of the pandemic. So we had no options. We were flailing. People were dying in hospitals. It felt like a war zone. And we said, well, you know, risk benefit analysis, if it could help save some people, even though we know that it's not exactly the most benign treatment, let's give it and see if it helps. We then did the clinical trials and the clinical trials showed that it did not show any great benefit. And a lot of great doctors in good faith gave hydroxychloroquine. But now it's been shown that it doesn't. And so now the risks way outweigh the benefit, which has been shown to be none. So we don't use it in the in hospitals. Many people feel, you know, differently about that, and it's open to, you know, personal interpretation, but that's really what we recommend at this time. Now, I can't see what your first question was, my dear. So if you do have a mic, feel free to put your hand up or to unmute and you can ask me what your first question was, because I'm not finding it. There's so many comments. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We'll move on to another live question. But thank you for noticing that.
Sure.
Diana Harris, I'm going to allow you to talk and you can unmute your microphone to ask your question.
Hi, Diana. Welcome. I also want to shout out Emma Crocker, who's in the chat and who's from St. Louis. I can't believe the St. Louis community came out for this. So it's not just Cali, folks. We're across the country and maybe across the world. But Diana, what is your question?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. First, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to have the webinar and just educate us.
Oh, of course.
I think I can speak for a lot of people. I wasn't actually comfortable having this conversation with my doctor because they don't look like me. So when I bring up issues, it's like, oh no, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. And I'm like, I'm talking about life and death. You can't really tell me not to worry about that. And I go, okay, great, because my doctor said. So just taking the time, I think you did a phenomenal job on the part of a lot of doctors. So it just really started to resonate that I may need to start having a deeper level of conversation with my healthcare provider.
Yes.
So because this is going to be ongoing. We don't know what's going to happen next year, the year after that. And to be bombarded with all these questions and feel like you don't have any answer to it. And my whole thing was I just didn't want to be afraid. If I took the vaccine, I don't want to be afraid. If I do take it, I just don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be scared, like shaking and pass out before I can even get, the vaccine. So I really appreciate it. I think you tore down a lot of things, being truthful, like we didn't make this up. This fear that we have is very fundamental. It's very concrete and it's very real.
Yes.
And I remember early in the beginning, well, maybe you just need to talk to somebody that looks like you. And I'm like, just because they look like me doesn't mean I trust them still. Like, you're not from the same neighborhood I'm from. That's a no-no sometimes.
Now, who are you telling? I'm not everybody's cup of tea too. I am too loud, too bright, too this, too sharp-tongued. And that's why representation matters. That's why diversity and representation and inclusion matters, because I can't speak for all Black people. I certainly don't speak for all Africans. And you need to find a doctor. That is a lifelong relationship. It's a difficult relationship. And I like to think I'm the bee's knees and most of my patients love me, but I haven't unfortunately been for everyone. And sometimes I've had to be okay with a patient going to see another doctor. But I want to be very clear about the role of doctors and public health experts, including Dr. Fauci, when it comes to the vaccine. It is not my job to coerce you and force you and make you feel like you're stupid or you're not educated or you're not making the best decision if you don't take a vaccine. My job is not to force you to take a COVID vaccine. My job is to understand that I have access to more information, a depth of information, and more resources than you would have because I went to medical school and I got a master's in public health and I do this work every day and I do the research and I read the papers. That's my job. That's the job that I owe you. So my job, my only job is to give you the best information that I can give you and hopefully do it in a way that you can access it and understand it so you make the best decision for you and your family. And even if that decision doesn't look like the decision I made for myself and my family, that is not my business or my place to judge. And that's hard for me because some of the feedback we got during this pandemic is that y'all don't appreciate scare tactics and coercion. And sometimes physicians do it without meaning to. You know, this whole, I work in these, and I see death and everybody's dying, ventilator, death. That's not an effective way to teach people and to talk to people. So that's why you see me use a lot of my personal story, talk about my kids. A picture of my baby being born is very personal on a PowerPoint slide, but it's important for me to connect so that you know that I'm also a mom, I'm someone's daughter, I'm someone's granddaughter, I'm someone's best friend, I'm someone's wife. In addition to being a physician. But at the end of the day, the decision is yours and no one should shame you for the decision you make. I want to see us all protected and I want to see us all healthy, but it's not my job to judge. My job is to give you the information so that you can make the best decision for you. And you should have that type of relationship with your doctor. You should ask questions. You should hold them accountable. I've always told patients, if I talk to you in a way that you don't appreciate, you need to let me know. Me and my ego will deal with it on our own time, but I need to come back and be better for you. And that's really what medicine should be like. And that's what community should be like, right? We've been sitting here for 2 hours, just chalking it up, chatting about it. And there are people here who don't agree with all my answers, and that's okay. And maybe they have other trusted resources and trusted messengers. But I will say that a trusted messenger when it comes to healthcare must be a healthcare provider, must be a person who does this work, right? I wouldn't go to a librarian to help them, to ask them to fix my plumbing, right? And we can't do that with this vaccine. Politicians are not, they can give us access and resources, but they do not know this information and should not be the ones driving policy. And I could get in trouble for saying that, child, which is why I'm never gonna be anybody's anything, because you see this mouth is fast, quick, and dangerous. But that's my truth. So Diana, you have done nothing wrong. You have been yourself. You should put yourself in spaces that you feel safe. You should find people that you connect with that give you this information in accessible ways. And at the end of the day, you make the best decision for you and your family, boom. And that's that.
And I appreciate that. I mean, it really, really means a lot. Because when you're having everything thrown at you, make a decision. It's like, I can't, because I don't know what I'm dealing with. I just can't. And to have somebody to say, yes, your fears are real. Yes, you should have these doubts. Yes, you're okay with these questions. And yes, we don't know. That's a huge one. When you can answer every question all the time, it puts up a red flag, like you know too much about what I don't know. So to say we don't know everything, but you got to do the best you can with what we do know.
Absolutely. And that's why I respect Dr. Fauci, because what he doesn't know, he doesn't know. And he's smart enough and has been around. I mean, this man has seen us through Ebola, He is my hero. Kismika Corbett is my shiro. You know, it's a bunch of people out there who are so knowledgeable. But at the end of the day, we don't know everything, but we do have more educated guesses than other people. And we still have to deal with risk-benefit analyses, even when we don't know. That's the bottom line. You know what I mean? Don't let your fear consume you. Don't think that hiding will protect you. And figure out what's best for you and at what time. You know, for anyone who hasn't got the vaccine, you do have the benefit of time and seeing what's happened. People haven't dropped dead from the vaccine. The numbers have gone down. It correlates. I showed you that graph directly to when the vaccine was given. And so obviously I believe in it, but at the same time, there's a lot that goes into timing and decision making and your relationship with the people that give this information over time. I get that. You're absolutely fine. And I appreciate your voice. I think you speak for many people on this call and across this country and across this world. And again, I think you're awesome. I think if we lived close to each other, you and me we'd be kicking it and grabbing drinks, girl.
Where do you live?
In St. Louis. I'm in St. Louis right now, St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, it's nothing but a flight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nice to
Thank you,
meet you.
Diana.
Thank you so much for that wonderful question and comment.
Thanks so much. Okay, I am gonna go to Kiana Smith. Kiana, I'm gonna unmute your, I'm gonna allow talk and you just need to unmute to ask your question.
Thank you. Can you
Hi,
hear me?
Kiana. And is that Kiana or Kiana?
It's Kiana.
Hey,
Thank you,
Kiana.
Kiana.
Thank you. Hi. I have a question. My question is actually stopping me from getting it, so I want a little bit more research. What side effects will we see in the future from other vaccines?
From other vaccines or from these ones?
From the other vaccine, like with Johnson & Johnson, we've seen.
Oh, yeah. So the vaccines, the side effects that I gave you are across the board. So since we have a little bit of time, let me just pull up this list so that you guys can see it. But those side effects that I gave are what we're seeing across the board, and they held up to be true with Johnson & Johnson too, because understand that the side effects have nothing to do with the vaccine itself. It has to do with immunity, right? And so some of those vaccines will have their individualized side effects, like that rare but serious side effect with Johnson & Johnson with the blood clots. But other than that, a lot of those side effects reflect what we see in the community. So I'm going to share screen. And can you see the screen right now, Kiana?
Yes, ma'am.
Again, this is the CDC, which I love because they have a lot of great information. And again, Johns Hopkins has a great site. Harvard has a great site. There's a lot of great sites, but you can't just Google something and read it from Google because you don't know who's vetted that information and you need to feel comfortable. So again, the common side effects that we see across the board, that's Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, or Moderna, are the pain, the redness, and the swelling. Then you can get the tiredness, the headache, the muscle pain, the chills, the fever, and the nausea. Those are the universal ones, regardless of the vaccine, because again, they reflect more so what your immune system, how your immune system is responding. And then some of the vaccine themselves, the only sort of unique side effects are the ones that I gave you around the serious but very rare clot in Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. And then we're still collecting data about what that will look like long-term. Okay?
Okay.
What other question does that help, Kiana, or did you have something more specific I didn't answer?
It helped. I think I'm just more scared, like, what other side effects come in the near future, like within a year or two.
As in within a year. So you're talking about long-term. And so what's cool about that is we've been giving this vaccine since December, and then people had the option to kind of report their side effects through this side effect reporting system. And we are seeing that there's nothing outside of these common ones that we know about that are being seen across the board. And that there has been no signal to anything that we see in high numbers. Do you see what I'm saying? We're going to continue to follow that. So you're right. We won't know for 5 years, 10 years out, but let me give you an example. So you take all these other vaccines, right? Polio vaccines and flu vaccines and all these other vaccines that you take as a child, if your parents opted to do so. Those vaccines have shown 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years out to be safe. Most vaccines have the same baseline components, and the only thing that changes is around the actual virus itself. That is safe and effective. And again, even though you won't know 5, 10, 15, 30 years out, we know with a certain degree of comfort that vaccines overall that we've developed in the same way, in the same fashion, using the same protocols, have been shown to be effective long-term. Now, if a vaccine were to do something like cause infertility, let's be honest here. The Pfizer vaccine don't want that smoke. They wouldn't be able to afford it. The legal ramifications would be great. It just would never happen. They would never put something on the market that they could lose money from or just lose their whole business from, right? And then at the end of the day, Kiana, you just have to sit down and think about, again, do I want to take my chances with this vaccine that has already been shown to be safe and effective for the last year that it's been around? Or do I want to take my chances with COVID, which I showed you the statistics, especially in our communities, 3 times more likely to be, 4 times more likely to be severely hospitalized, like on a ventilator, 3 more times more likely to die. That's really the way that we have to look at it. But you're right, we're not going to know what happens 5, 10, 15 years out because we're just not there yet. So it's hard.
Thank you so much, Kiana.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kiana.
We are right at 2 o'clock, and we still have so many questions that we didn't get answered today. But I want to be respectful of Dr. Davis's time, and we've been so appreciative of the time that we have had you. We may be in touch for a part 2 because there's so many questions that we did not get to. Dr. Davis, can't thank you enough for this real conversation.
Cannot thank you enough, Mark. You're an awesome host. The bow tie was killing it. And I don't know how you stayed on top of the questions and spoke to me. That was incredible. I want to really thank Jordan, and who was our other interpreter today?
Jordan and...
Jessica? No.
Nope.
Jordan and our other beautiful interpreter. Amy. What's your name?
Amy.
Amy. Jordan and Amy did a phenomenal job. And again, all the sponsors that made this possible. I'm so sorry I couldn't get to all the questions, but again, follow me on my social media outlets, and definitely if there is a need for a part 2, let them know, and I'd be happy to come back. You guys are awesome and very encouraging. And even when we didn't agree, thank you for being respectful, because that's what life's about, right? We're not always going to agree, but we can be respectful and then make our own decisions. So thank you so much, everyone.
And Dr. Davis, you took my whole closing. You thanked
Did I?
You thanked our sponsor, co-sponsors. You're amazing.
Mark, I did too much. Look at me. This is why I'm so extra. I'm sorry, Mark.
Oh, it's been wonderful to spend this time with you, Dr. Davis, and we'll certainly be in touch in the future. And thank you so much. Everybody, thank you so much for your attendance. Have a wonderful day. We will get this posted to our YouTube channel, the recording. We will get it out to our the folks that registered. It'll also be posted to our website. And thanks everybody for spending this time with us today. Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Thanks, everybody. Love being here, and talk soon.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.